If you're just tuning in, I'm about to go live here in a couple of seconds. So hang in there as I get this going. Let's see here. I'm trying to get things sorted out here. Go. All right, we are ready to get going. So, let me see here. All right, well, I think we're good. So, good evening. Welcome to my 7 p.m. Central Time live stream on Thursdays. If you're just tuning in, we have a lot of stuff to go over, lots of things happening this week, both with what's going in Washington, D.C., as well as what's going on in Texas. So what are the top 5 topics for today? We'll talk about the government getting funded. So no challenges there. That was a deadline on October 1st. We'll go into what's happening with the debt ceiling. Then we'll talk about the reconciliation bill, which is back and forth. On the 27th of September, remember, we were supposed to have a vote on the $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill. And like I've been telling you for the entire month of September, that date was non-binding. And guess what? It did not happen because the votes were not there. So what's going to happen? There was supposed to be a vote today, but that vote still has not happened, at least last I checked. So I'll bring you up to speed on what's going on reconciliation and, with Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema, will it actually pass? Or are we going to get nothing? So I'll go a little bit over that. And then I want to go into what happened to the George Floyd Act. And this is an extremely disappointing scenario that we have. This act is now dead in Congress. We don't have any negotiations. We spent the entire of 2020, this entire country, there were protests in all 50 states, and we are unable to get a bill that not only eliminates and gets rid of qualified immunity. That's off the table. It's been off the table for weeks, but nor can we get any kind of reform in policing whatsoever. And I will play you clips of Senator Tim Scott's interview that happened on Sunday on Face the Nation. I'll just play you 3 quick clips to show you what really is going on here. And then last but not the least, Texas redistricting. As you know, Texas is getting 2 new U.S. congressional districts. And of course, we have redistricting throughout Texas. That means pretty much every House line and every Senate line, state Senate and state House, will change here and there because of population growth. And we'll let you know where we are there and how do we beat what's going on in Texas right now. As you know, the GOP legislator here has a trifecta, and they have passed right now extreme voter suppression laws. That's number 1. Then they went ahead and passed laws to ensure that reproductive health care was taken away from Texans. And now there's more. Now, on top of Senate Bill 1, the voter suppression bill that was passed, they're increasing the penalties on anyone who commits quote-unquote voter fraud. Now, remember, the Texas indicted AG spent 22,000 hours looking for people who committed voter fraud and was unable to find a single issue that resulted in jail time. So that's where we are in Texas, and we'll talk a little bit about the seriousness of what's going on and how we can reverse that. So let's get started, first of all, with the government being funded. So as you know, there was a government shutdown pending on October 1st. A stopgap measure to keep the government from running out of money and being able to pay everybody's salaries that works for the government is known as what's called a continuing resolution. So it expired today, September 30th, and for tomorrow morning there was a vote, bipartisan vote taken on this continuing resolution. Now, to give you a little bit of perspective, remember that Democrats had put this bipartisan, stopgap measure, what's called the continuing resolution, and they had paired it with the debt ceiling and put it together in a bill, which was put in front of the Senate this week, and it did not pass because Mitch McConnell, the minority leader in the Senate, said he will not vote. Republicans will not help Democrats to pass, to remove the debt ceiling or increase the debt ceiling as punishment, he says, for doing the $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill because they're going it alone. So that's his reasoning for not removing the debt ceiling. So that failed. So then Democrats brought in what's called a clean bill, which only had the continuing resolution in it. And continuing resolution is a term that's used for a stopgap measure. It's a temporary funding of the government from October 1st through the end of the fiscal year. So that's all it is. And it did need to overcome the 60 vote threshold in the Senate, which it did. It passed in the Senate 65 to 35, as you can see right here in this CBS News story. And then, of course, the bill also cleared the House 254 to 175. And the only reason that's of interest at all is that there were Republican votes. It was a bipartisan funding of the government, which should be a normal thing that we do all the time. But of course, Republicans have to make everything, Republicans in the Congress that is, they have to make everything difficult and impossible. So what is going on with the debt ceiling? Now, I have gone over a little bit about the debt ceiling multiple times with all of you. And as you know, the debt ceiling right now, I think it's somewhere, south of 28.4 trillion. That's what it is right now. And so Janet Yellen, she came out, she's the Treasury Secretary. She said that she obviously favors removing the debt ceiling, and she actually lends her support for removing the debt ceiling altogether. So instead of improving it little bit by little, or what happened is that they suspended the debt ceiling for a certain period of time during 2020 through 2021 because of these huge coronavirus bills, these pandemic bills that were passed all through 2020 and 2021. They suspended it because they knew that we would basically, exceed the debt ceiling that was in place. Now, this runs out somewhere around October the 18th. So she said that once we get to October 18th, we will basically be in default. So the United States would be in default. So what that is, just to give you a quick primer, if you're not familiar with the debt ceiling, basically this is how the Treasury, spends money for everything that has already been spent. So it's paying for things that have already been spent by the United States government. So they're paying the bill. It's like a credit card bill coming due. Now, every single time they increase the debt ceiling or they suspend the debt ceiling, what really happens is it allows the Treasury to sell Treasury bonds. So they don't just issue currency in the United States, or they haven't so far. What they do is they sell these Treasury bonds to anybody. And so people with hundreds of millions of dollars and billions of dollars can buy these Treasury bonds. And it's a way for them to put billions of dollars in a place where they feel it's quite secure because they believe in the credit of the United States government, because all of us get up in the morning, we go to work, we create products and services, and that's really what creates the credit of the United States. It's not so much that, the debt ceiling per se, but it is an important part. Now, Democrats have a choice. One, they can pass this alone, and it would have to be part of their reconciliation bill. That's the only way they could pass it alone. However, what Democrats are saying is that this has always been a bipartisan exercise. And by the way, the GOP, you ran up this bill $7.8 trillion under President Trump, under the former guy. And so you have a obligation to vote with us in a bipartisan way to suspend the debt ceiling. Remember, this has nothing to do with new spending. This is just paying for spending that's already been done. So Republicans, specifically Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, he wants to say, well, you guys want to go it alone, go ahead, go it alone. You can suspend the debt ceiling all on your own. You don't need us. And this is a way that he wants to punish basically Democrats for passing this $3.5 trillion bill, reconciliation bill, which we will talk about next. So that's kind of where we are with respect to this debt ceiling. We still have 18 days. And that is a long time when it comes to our government, believe it or not. Even though they're extremely slow, it seems like whenever they're put on a deadline, they get up and do something about it. I don't know what will happen. Of course, any senator, including any Democratic senator, can just say, you know what? Let's not increase the debt ceiling. Let's see what happens. GOP, Congress people, you don't want to do this in a bipartisan way? Well, let's just see what happens if we don't do this. It is not good for our country, but at the same time, the GOP should be doing this in a bipartisan way. So for all those people that really believe in bipartisanship, right now, what you should be doing is calling up your GOP representatives in the Senate, your congressman in the Senate. So in Texas, we've got 2 of them, unfortunately, and telling them you should be voting on lifting the debt ceiling. And that's how we hold them accountable, even though we may not agree with any of their policy points at all. So moving on to the most important part of today's show, Manchin versus reconciliation, right? We've heard about the reconciliation bill. I've given you a lot of information about the reconciliation bill. In fact, if you're interested to know what's in there, you can go check it out on my YouTube. I've talked about multiple things. For example, 2-year free community college. We're talking about free pre-K. We're talking about things like permanent child tax credits. We're talking about lots of programs for the bottom 50% middle-class Americans, which would be a game changer for many middle-class families, right? That's what's in the reconciliation bill. And what's infuriating about it is it's $3.5 trillion, which was already a compromise. And this compromise happens over 10 years. Now, remember, we spend north of $700 billion on our military industrial complex. And no one ever questions where that money comes from. How do we pay for it? Those are not questions that we ever ask. We spent $300 million per day for 20 years, 2 decades. If you had a baby 20 years ago, imagine that baby is now a 20-year-old. And we spent $300 million in Afghanistan to accomplish what? Yet nobody wants to hold our government accountable for spending our hard-earned wealth to accomplish nothing. So that's where we are in terms of reconciliation. But I want to bring you a couple of clips of what Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia is saying. So here's the first clip that I'll play you.
Means testing means that are we targeting the people that need it or getting it, or the people getting it that maybe could do without, and they're in pretty good shape. So I said means testing. I said work requirements. Those are all very, very important in these things, and that way you target children. So you have the beginning of life, our children. Pre-K, yes. Then you have the end where our senior citizens want to live in the dignity and respect of their own home. We can do that with some assistance. And again, some can pay a little bit, and some can't pay any. That's means testing. It goes an awful long way that way. I'm just not, so you know, I cannot accept our economy or basically our society moving towards an entitlement mentality, that you're entitled, okay? I'm more of a rewarding, because I can help those who really need help if those who can help themselves do so.
So there you go. He talked about means testing, right? So what his concern is that he does not want to give money to anybody who is not held accountable, who doesn't make a certain amount of money, who doesn't work. And he repeated it over and over again. Now, here's what means testing actually does. And I'll give you a really great example. There was $46 billion allotted for tenants, for renters, and other people to help them with housing and the cost of rent while they lost their jobs during the pandemic. Because this was means tested, and because these forms to apply were anywhere upwards of 20 pages longer and included the requirement of having the landlord be collaborative with the person who's renting, millions of families, somewhere close to 11 million families, right, were and still are to this day on the verge of being evicted. This is what means testing does. What it does is it punishes the people that are the least financially literate, that have the least amount of time to figure out how to get this form, how to fill it out accurately, and to do it in a way that it meets all the requirements that these 22 pages and more have on them. And it leaves the most vulnerable people in our country out. If you are really worried that millionaires and billionaires are getting money from the United States government without earning it, you can always settle it on their taxes at the end of the year. You can wealth tax them, which I'm a huge advocate of. You can tax them for income over $1 million, $10 million per year, which I'm a huge advocate of. But means testing does not help you get money to the most vulnerable. What it does do is it drives people into homelessness. It drives people into mental health cases where they're unable to recover from that. It drives people into substance abuse. And then we get homelessness across our country, tents across our cities, and then we wonder why we have that situation. Means testing is the most horrible way to enact any kind of policy, but that is what Joe Manchin is for. He doesn't believe in giving anybody anything. So if you, for some reason, a young mother who's in high school gets pregnant by mistake and is stuck and doesn't have a job, she will not be able to get any kind of unemployment. She will not be able to get any kind of childcare. She will not be able to get free pre-K for that kid so she can go to community college and get an education and get a job. That's what we're doing to families, and I will provide you data to back that up. This is data from the Federal Reserve System directly about the wealth by ownership in the United States. And you can see here the top 1% of Americans in this country. We're talking about the top 1%. 1 out of every 100 people, okay, in the United States own over $40 trillion of wealth. This is ownership in real estate, in commercial real estate, in businesses, in stock. This is their wealth. We're not talking about income, we're talking about wealth. Yet the bottom 50%, their wealth is only $2.62 trillion. In fact, the top 1% has more wealth than the entire bottom 90% together. So one person has more wealth than the bottom 90 people. That's where we are in the United States. And why is that? It's because the bottom 50% of our country are unable to save or accumulate any kind of wealth. Every single dollar that they earn is used on survival expenses, rent, mortgage, utilities, food, buying that backpack for their kids and those sneakers. They literally have nothing left at the end of the month. And to say that these people don't work hard, to say that school teachers don't work hard, to say that nurses in our country, healthcare workers don't work hard, first responders don't work hard, to say that people at retail stores who stand all day long, 8 hours, don't work hard, to say that restaurant servers who get paid $2 and some change per hour plus tips don't work hard, and that they don't deserve to get childcare, that they don't deserve to get paid leave, paid medical leave, that they don't deserve to go to community college and be able to dig themselves out from these low-paid jobs. To say that we need to means test them is saying that I don't want to do anything for the bottom 50% of our country. It's the wrong policy and it will not help our country. But let's see what else Senator Joe Manchin has to say.
Did you share that number with the president, and has that 1.5
The last week or so.
Have you shared it with Senator Sinema? And did that number go up?
Senator Sinema knows that.
Has your top line raised since
my
then?
top line has not been. My top line has been 1.5 because I believe in my heart that what we can do and what the needs we have right now and what we can afford to do without basically changing our whole society to an entitlement mentality.
Did you share that?
So you heard that. His top line number is $1.5 trillion. Okay? And why? Why is that? Because he believes in his heart, not because he looks at the data, not because he understands how the bottom 50% of our country lives, but because he believes in his heart that we should not have this entitlement mentality. Yet wealthy people, millionaires in our country, when they take care of their children and they get them all the equipment they need to play sports, when they get them into private, schools, the best private schools, the best private universities, the Ivy League colleges, and pay full tuition if they can, that's not entitlement. If your, parents leave you with millions of dollars because they were able to save up generational wealth, that's not entitlement. But if you get a leg up in the United States of America to get free pre-K, to be able to go to community college debt-free, then that is an entitlement. That's what Senator Manchin is saying. And let's listen to this last part because this will be this will really drive the point home.
I've never been a liberal in any way, shape, or the form. There's no one who's ever thought I was. I've been governor, I've been state secretary of state, I've been state legislature, I've been a U.S. senator, and I have voted pretty consistently all my whole life. I don't fault any of them who believe that they're much more progressive and much more liberal. God bless them. And all they need to do is we have to elect more, I guess, for them to get theirs, elect more liberals.
So there you go. Elect more liberals. If you want to help the bottom 50% elect more liberals, I don't know what a liberal means, but apparently it means that you want to be able to give people childcare so they can go get an education, so they can go get a job, right? In a country where we have a lack of, a lack of workers right now. That's what he's saying. He said, go elect more people that want to do that. I can't help you. My top line is $1.5 trillion. So now, what will happen? Will this $1.5 trillion bill go through? Let's see what's going on. So all week we had reporters clamoring to know what's going to happen. And what they're saying today, and this is about 4 p.m. Central Time, tweeted out that behind the scenes, Speaker Pelosi and Senator Schumer are huddling up with White House advisors. So this is Ambassador Rice and Brian Deese, and they are working on a compromise language between the White House, the Senate, and the House that would bring Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin along. Senator Sinema was also asked this morning, or today rather, what she wanted to do, and she said that she does not negotiate in public. However, she has made her requirements clear to the White House. So the White House knows, the Senate knows exactly what she wants. But remember, she made it very clear that she was not for being able to negotiate prescription drug prices under Medicare, the Medicare program in the United States. So right now, Medicare cannot negotiate prescription drug prices, and Senator Sinema does not want that to happen. Now, on average in the United States, we pay 2.5 times the price for any drug than anywhere else in the world. That's on average. In some cases, we pay 10, 20 times the price of drugs that is sold anywhere else, and you only have to go look at Canada to see why that's happening. Basically, we not only fund the entire world's prescription drug prices, we subsidize it, we subsidize the research as well, and unfortunately, Senator Sinema is not on board on the government being able to negotiate drug prices. So she made that very clear. That's a statement that she agrees to. So it's not like speculation or anything like that. So it looks like they're still working on it. There's still a chance. Now remember this. The immigration part already failed from the reconciliation bill. So that's out. Immigration Plan B, which I discussed before about changing the date on a previous immigration act, also failed. The parliamentarians said no, and definitely no. That's happened twice. So a lot of things are already out of this $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill. The question is, what will be left at the end of the day, and will it get voted on by the Senate, and will it be enough for the House progressives, the Congressional Progressive Caucus, to vote on it? So let's go to what the CPC chair is saying, and that is Representative Pramila Jayapal. And she tweeted this out around 5 p.m. Central Time, and she says, we won't let massive corporations, billionaires, and a few conservative Democrats stand in the way of delivering transformational progress for millions of working people. Stick to the plan, pass both bills together. So what we've seen so far, which I've been saying all month, it looks like the CPC is holding ground. And remember, I've said this over and over again, that this is not about a handful of very left House members. This is not about 4 or 5 or 6 people holding out. You need the force of the CPC and the overwhelming majority of the CPC, somewhere between 40 votes to 45 votes, maybe even 50 votes in the CPC. And there's 96 members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and somewhere around 45 to 50 of them are saying we will not vote for the bipartisan bill, that's the infrastructure bill, without this bill going together. Now, what they haven't said is whether they will compromise on the $3.5 trillion bill. For example, if Senator Manchin wants it to come down to $1.5 trillion and it happens to be there, will they agree to that bill? Well, according to Senator Manchin, if they want to pass anything higher, they need to go elect more liberals. So that's his solution for that. Even though there are polls out there that West Virginians, even though this is a very red state, quote unquote, are very much in favor of what is in the $3.5 trillion bill. So these are very much wanted by the American people. The American people put Democrats in the House, even though it's a very slim margin. They put Democrats in the Senate. They gave a Democratic president the White House, and now they would like them to deliver. But Manchin's message to all Democrats is, you're going to have to go elect more Democrats because I believe in means testing and no more than $1.5 trillion. So that's where we end it. Now, what could happen? I think there's a very good chance that Democrats will come together, but the hopes of actually passing the full $3.5 trillion bill seems to be waning. And it seems to be, going away, but it's yet to be seen. And we could still have a vote tonight, but we'll see what goes on. So with that, let's talk about the George Floyd Act. So I brought this to your attention multiple times that there was a police reform act known as the George Floyd Policing Act that was brought to the Senate and is being negotiated by Democratic Senator Booker, GOP Senator Tim Scott, and Representative Karen Bass in the House. They were the 3 key people assigned to negotiate a reform bill. Now, that bill has been completely axed, and apparently there is no way that it will make it to actual legislation and laws being passed. So I want to play to you 3 small clips of Senator Tim Scott and what he's saying, and let you know what the other side, actual law enforcement, is also saying, and then let you decide who is really at the center of us not having any change after a man was, murdered on camera, why we don't have any change. So let's see the first clip.
Allocating it in different ways.
Actually, here's what we know. We have about $1 billion in grant money that goes to police. When you start saying in order to receive those dollars, you must do A, B, and C, and if you don't do A, B, and C, you literally lose eligibility for the 2 major pots of money, the burn grants and the COP grants. When you tell local law enforcement agencies that you are ineligible for money, that's defunding the police. There's no way to spin that. You can spin it by saying...
But this would codify the Trump executive order.
Let me finish. The Trump executive order, I actually agreed to. What I did not agree to was the cuts that come from non-compliance. When you say, once again, that in order for you to receive the money for the burn grants or the COP grants, you must do the following. And if you don't do the following, you lose money. That's more defunding the police. We saw that tried throughout the country.
You wouldn't want to cut funding for underperformance, is what you're saying?
Not at all. I would say
You would want to increase to police departments that aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing?
Let's look at what we're asking for. What the Democrats asked for was a simple thing.
So, so you can see here, the first thing he's saying is that the reason that he doesn't support it is because there are requirements in this bill for police departments across the country to be able to get the funding. So they have to do what he says, A, B, and C, in order for them to get funding. They can't just get it. So think about it this way. We are means testing every single family to get basic, needs that they need to be able to, dig themselves out and just have a decent life. This is working families, right? Trying to get health care, child care, trying to go to school to better their careers. And we're means testing the heck out of them. Not only does the GOP not want to give them anything at all, we have Democratic senators saying that we can't just give this away. We must means test everything. Yet, we should be, according to Senator Tim Scott, be able to give away money to police departments without any kind of requirements in place, because that would be, quote unquote, in his words, taking away money or defunding the police. Now, in this interview, you can go watch it. It's on Face the Nation. It's a, I don't know how many minutes is it. It's a 13-minute interview. You can go watch it yourself. And the interviewer does give him examples of where there's actually more money being spent on these types of activities. So, for example, there's extra money in this bill for things like training, for things like body cameras, for things like mental health, responses, etc. So instead of saying, she makes the point that there is more money in there, but his point is, if you put any kind of requirements for police departments to get money, I will not support it. So let's look at the second clip, and I want to play the second clip for you.
2 years. I'm going to give you the answer to the defunding the police.
But isn't this just Republicans not wanting to look like they are being soft on crime ahead of the 2020
Of course
race?
not. That's the answer to the question. No.
Was that part of your calculation at all?
Not at all. Why would I be at a table? I'm the person who has lived in the communities that we're talking about. I'm the person who has experienced the challenges that we are trying to solve. I'm the person who understands and appreciates this issue intimately. I'm not having an academic conversation about something I know very little about.
So,
you said, let me finish. I understand this issue better than most people. And I will tell you this, that if you want to keep our communities safe, you have to properly fund the police.
So there you go. He says, first of all, that he is not the person that's having an academic conversation. This is something that is an intimate part of his experience in the United States. He's saying that he's the person having to face these challenges, but if you want to solve these problems, you have to appropriately fund the police. That's how he ended this. Now, remember at the beginning of this clip, the interviewer asked him, aren't you just trying to, be tough on crime for your new, because you're up for re-election? I believe he's up for re-election in 2022. Isn't that the reason why you're not signing on to this act, which, by the way, does not remove qualified immunity? That's been off the table for a long time. And in fact, until you remove qualified immunity, we will not be able to hold police accountable in this country for what they do. So he's saying here, look, I'm not having an academic conversation, but if you don't fund the police, then we're not going to be able to properly solve these problems. And I want to show you this last clip. I think it's just a rehash of this.
You have to properly fund the police. If you say to the police, I'm going to reduce your funding if you don't allow us to nationalize this conversation and nationalize local police, you lose funding. That is something I won't agree to.
So there you go. He will not agree to it because there are stipulations put on this money, and you have to fund the police. That's the point he wants to make. So I want you guys to think about this. if we had funded the police better, do you think that somehow the George Floyd incident wouldn't have taken place because now we've funded the police more? I don't know how that ties to that incident or incidents of where, police officers are completely not taking into account what is happening in the situation and obviously creating situations that don't need to be. But don't take it from me. I'm going to bring you the other side, actual law enforcement. So here's what law enforcement is saying. So the International Association of Chiefs of Police, this is the IACP, and the Fraternal Order of Police, FOP, they are disappointed that the Senate negotiators could not reach an agreement on police reform legislation. They wanted this. So law enforcement themselves are saying, we want this. And guess what they're saying in the second paragraph? You can read it yourself, by the way. This is online. I can share that link with you. Despite some media reports, at no point did any legislative draft propose defunding the police. They're specifically arguing what Senator Tim Scott is calling defund the police. He's saying that there's no other way you can spin it. Remember in the first video, and they're saying this legislative draft doesn't propose that. In fact, the legislation specifically provided additional funding to assist law enforcement agencies in training, agency accreditation, the data collection initiatives, and it is our joint belief, meaning the IACP and the FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police, that provisions under discussions would have strengthened the law enforcement provision and helped improve the state of community police engagement without compromising management and officer rights, authorities, and legal protections. So despite the fact that I don't believe that this act goes far enough, because until you remove and repeal qualified immunity, we will not see true accountability in the United States of police officers. But the funny thing is, this act itself is supported by law enforcement themselves. So don't take it from me, take it from the folks that would be impacted by this legislation. And I will give you a second point of data to basically counter what Senator Tim Scott brought up in his arguments. So this is a interview, and this is two small excerpts of the interview that I want to share with you. And this interview is with Edwin Raymond. Edwin Raymond, he is a police lieutenant in New York City. He was interviewed on the Freakonomics podcast, which is one of the podcasts that I often listen to because I love listening about data analysis and research that's been done out there. And he was interviewed. Now, before I read the two excerpts of his interview, this Lieutenant Raymond, he is the lead plaintiff in a federal lawsuit which alleges that the NYPD, the New York Police Department, used an illegal quota system to arrest people, and that the system disproportionately targeted minorities. The NYPD denies its use, that it uses quotas, and many of the system and does not that the system disproportionately targets minorities. I read that wrong. The NYPD denies that it uses quotas, and many of the lawsuit claims have been dismissed. However, he is currently the plaintiff in a lawsuit. So this is a long interview about an individual who went into the policing profession. And one of the things he talks about two things. One is he talks about when he was in the police academy, everything on paper is pretty good. But what actually goes on, that's where things are different. He says, for instance, it's like a boot camp in the police academy. And their justification for treating you that way is that they're instilling discipline. So if you encounter someone in the street that tells you, get lost, or speaks to you in a violent or disrespectful manner, you're not going to go crazy and do something, he says. And then he says, that's what it says in the book. And that's the culture of the academy. But when you get out, it's like, don't ever let anyone talk negatively to a cop. You know why? Because with you, it'll be, disrespect, and then there'll be a push, and eventually they'll feel comfortable enough to kill a cop. So you nip it right in the butt. So it's like, wow, that's completely the opposite of like, I sat there for 6 months and let you guys yell in my face because it's supposed to be teaching me discipline. What he's saying is that in the police academy, when they're getting trained, they are taught not to react aggressively to people that are being hostile to them when they're actually out there policing. However, in reality, they're told in real life, you want to be extremely, come on extremely strong and make sure that you don't allow any kind of disrespect, because that is going to result in police officers being killed. That is what's happening in reality. The second point that he brings up is he talks about police who work in different precincts who are in competition with each other over who can get the most arrests for the month. And because these arrests feed the policy from the leadership, they're unable to see how problematic that culture is. So imagine if you're being incentivized, what he's trying to say is if you're being incentivized on how many arrests, you're not going to be very discerning about how many arrests. You're going to try to get that arrest up. And if you can provoke somebody to get them to resist arrest or to put them in a situation where they normally would not react that way if you just had a normal conversation with them, but you're basically provoking them to have a bad interaction with you so you can arrest them to get your arrest numbers up, that doesn't make any sense. What he's pointing out here is that the incentives for policing in our country are all wrong. And both this, podcast, which talks about what is wrong in policing in our country, along with the reaction from, the IACP and the FOP statement, you can see that even from law enforcement, they want to see change in their discipline, and they want to see change in the way that they carry out their profession. Because the way it is right now just does not work. And I'll leave you with some statistics. In 2020 in the United States, 1,000 people were shot and killed by police officers in the United States. That's approximately 34 people per 10 million. That's the number one killings by police officers in any country in the world. Now, the next country, number 2 country, happens to be Canada. And they're comparable because in Canada, they also have a lot of firearms among the population, but their number is 10 of 10 million. And the third is Australia with 9 of 10 million, which means the United States is more than 3 times the second and the third country where police officers are shooting and killing individuals just in the practice of policing. So that's where we are in our country. And this is an extreme disappointment that after we spent all of 2020 protesting what is happening in our country with respect to policing, that we have not been able to come to an agreement on legislation, real action. Because putting the police officer that murdered George Floyd in prison is not a solution. That is one case out of 1,000 people who died last year. That is not a long-term solution to policing in this country. That does not solve future issues. So that should not be the end of that. We should have a major change in our country, and we must repeal qualified immunity to get to that. So with that, I come to Texas redistricting, because I know that you guys are all waiting to figure out what's going to happen. So earlier this week on Monday, the U.S. congressional districts were released. And as you can see, Texas continues to be extremely gerrymandered. The two new districts that Texas gained, conventional wisdom was maybe one would go in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and the other one would go in the Houston area, obviously being the 2 big metropolitan areas in Texas. However, as you all know, back in late June, in fact, June 28th, when I announced my congressional run, I made the assertion that it is very highly likely that Austin will get a Democratic-leaning blue district. And this first round of maps, and keep in mind, this is just the first round of maps, it looks to be the case that Austin did get or have been assigned a new blue leading district, of which majority of it is in Travis County and a small portion of it is in Williamson County. So that is happening. The second new congressional district went in the Houston area, and that is a red leaning district. So the other 13 districts that today Democrats represent in the United States Congress, in the House of Representatives specifically, have will probably be kept by Democratic Congress members, with the addition of the one blue-leaning district in Austin, Texas. So that's where we are. Again, this is not final until this passes the special legislative session and is written into, actually passes the legislature and written into law. And then, of course, we can expect a lot of lawsuits basically challenging gerrymandering in Texas, which is very much alive and well. Now, the one interesting thing about all of this is that this is the first time in decades that Texas will be able to draw these maps without any kind of federal pre-clearance. This is something that the Supreme Court stripped away from the 1965 Voting Rights Act. There was an article in there that specifically applied to Texas because they had been discriminatory in their gerrymandering in the past. That means basically diluting the vote of minorities, Black Americans, Latino, and Hispanic Americans in Texas, that they needed pre-clearance from the Department of Justice. For the first time, after the 2020 census, they will not require this pre-clearance. And so that remains to be seen how that will be fought out in the courts. The chances are that the 2022 elections will go forward based on whatever's passed in the legislature, because that's what happened last decades. And if there are challenges in courts that are won by the other side, then there may be some changes to these districts and going forward. But we won't know that until that's fought. Now, this morning, we also saw the state house districts maps released as well. And of these districts, majority of them are Republican leaning. I believe somewhere around 84 of them are over 55% or higher Republican leaning, which means that the Texas legislator in the House would stay very much red and would take away more representation from not just Texas, but from Democrats in Texas. They would have less representation. So that's where we are with respect to Texas redistricting. Now, I want to leave you with this. How do you fight gerrymandering, say, for example, in Texas, right? Right now, it seems almost impossible to get out of because the Texas GOP legislator has a majority in the House, they have a majority in the Senate, and of course, they own the governorship, the lieutenant governorship, and the Attorney General's office. One of the ways that you can overcome this, iron grip on Texas is by winning statewide races, because there's no gerrymandering statewide. And here's the other figure. Over the last decade, the 95% of growth of population in Texas happened with Latino Americans, Hispanic Americans, Black Americans, and Asian Americans. 95%. So there's an opportunity for Democrats to bring a message to voters statewide that appeals to their needs. And you know what people in Texas want? They want high wage jobs. They want to be able to afford that home so that they can raise their families, to be able to buy a car so they can get to work. And they want a job so they can live their life without having to worry about where their next meal on their table is going to come from. They want to be able to send their kids to get, whether it's college, whether it's 2-year college, 4-year college, whether it's a training certificate, whether it's vocational training. They want them to be able to get that education debt-free, without the burden of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. That's what they want. If Democrats can bring that message to Texas, we can win statewide races and start to reverse the damage that the GOP has done to the state. So how does that happen? In 2018, former Representative Beto O'Rourke lost his Senate run by a little over 200,000 votes. Now, if you take 200,000 votes and you split it by 4 among the 4 big Democratic strongholds in Texas, that's Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, San Antonio, and Austin, not to mention also the border cities like El Paso, you're talking about somewhere around 50,000 votes per big city. We can do this. And remember, the voter turnout in Texas is somewhere around 66%. So you have registered voters. Every 3 in 10 registered voters in Texas is sitting at home and not voting. So we do have an opportunity to flip this state and slowly, bring back some representation and moderation to what is happening in Texas with respect to voter suppression, taking away reproductive rights, and on and on and on. There is an opportunity here, but we must do the work. We must take our message, and the message needs to be an economic one that really helps working families get by and working families dig themselves out of the debt they're in to thrive in Texas and to do well, because that's what they want. So how do you do that? And I want to leave you with my tweet from this week. After the public option was stripped from the ACA, Democrats lost the House. That's just fact. If Democrats strip Biden's full Build Back Better agenda, they're going to experience the same outcome. And here's why. When people give you the opportunity to lead and you make promises, they expect you to keep those promises. They want you to follow through on those promises. When you fail to deliver on your promises, even when you have the power to do so, you disenfranchise voters. They become discouraged, and in the next election cycle, they say, what's my vote worth? I went, I voted, I put Democrats in power, but they didn't deliver on what they said they would. What's the point in voting? And they sit that cycle out. And that's how we continue losing power and not being able to bring policies that really help working Americans. So with that, I want to thank you for tuning in. And I hope that you enjoyed today's stream. And if you're on Twitter, every Monday at 9 p.m. I do a Twitter Spaces. I open up the mic for anybody who wants to share their opinion or ask a question. So if you are not on Twitter, you can get Twitter, download the app on your phone. Follow me, Donna Imam TX, and you can join in the conversation. And with that, have a wonderful